I'm very proud to announce, this is the first time it's being announced publicly, Alpha Schools, the AI tech-driven school that is tremendously respected by the likes of Bill Ackman. Jack Lamont is the founder. He's spoken at iConnections. I've been working with them for months, and this is the first time being publicly announced. They'll be opening up a school location in Miami Beach.
Thanks for being here. And thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We are going to be jumping into a conversation about Florida, why capital and institutions are moving south. Joining us today, we have Joseph Magazine from the city of Miami Beach. He's a commissioner. Justus Parmar, founder and CEO of the venture capital firm Fortuna Investments. And Michael Simas, president and CEO of the Florida Council of 100. So let's jump right in. Over the past few years, we've seen some of the industry's biggest players set up offices in Florida, specifically Miami. On the hedge fund side, we see names like Citadel, Millennium, Balyasny. We know firms are building out their presence in the region and for the long term. But let's take a look at actual staffing of investment professionals. We do see a lot of back office, some of the Citadel security side as well too, but it does look like there are fewer hedge fund investment talents in Miami, and I'm wondering why do we think that might be?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between Miami now and some of the cycles that we've had in the past is the infrastructure and ecosystem that are actually accompanying it. Myself, not only am I elected official, but I'm also a long-term finance professional. Started on the structured credit trading desk at Merrill Lynch. Now I'm a senior partner with Justus at a venture capital firm. Those types of opportunities didn't exist before in Miami and Miami Beach. You would always have wealthy individuals that would make Florida either their permanent home or at times home. But what has really changed within the past few years, of course, started with COVID, but has really accelerated, is the economy that those wealthy individuals are bringing. It's not just the headline names. It wasn't just Orlando Bravo moving to Miami. He brought his entire firm there. So not only the senior principals, but they have the vice presidents, the associates, the analysts, and things like that. So while we're certainly not New York, people make that comparison. Is Miami going to overtake New York? No, and we're not attempting to. But we are building an infrastructure and an opportunity for people, whether they're born in Miami or actually want to move there, to have a prosperous career with a lot of opportunities that previously didn't exist.
Justus, do you have a sense why we're seeing maybe like sub-50 investment professionals from the hedge funds moving to Florida versus maybe some of the younger talent or maybe some of the securities or back office talent? Why there might be a dichotomy of interest?
Yeah, I think Florida's got a lot of things going for it as a state. And then within the state, South Florida's really starting to hit it out of the park. Pro-business atmosphere, zero state income tax, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Great lifestyle, great proximity to South America, Europe, New York City, so it's very centrally located for whatever it's worth. So I think a lot of these things are working in parallel, and a lot of really interesting things are happening. I'm originally from Canada. It's not easy moving, whether it's from New York City down to Florida or from Canada down to Florida. Just the whole moving process is actually very difficult and cumbersome. And so what I will say is that, and I've been going to South Florida for 20 years off and on, vacationing there, seeing friends, different things. But my real true 2.0 experience was during COVID. And so it was during that time, and again, we've got a presence in Los Angeles, we have an office here in New York, in Canada. So I was kind of bouncing around, and for me and my firm, we really saw that contrast during that particular time where we're in a lot of major cities, kind of moving and shaking, and just the accommodating nature of the folks from the highest level to the people on the ground was really compelling. And I think that's what, you asked about the hedge funds, that's when Ken Griffin and other folks really started to take it seriously. And 7-8 years ago, you would never even, if you were to write a book about that, people wouldn't buy the book because it would be so unbelievable. And so I think things do take time. I still think we're very in the early days, but the infrastructure, the ecosystem, the support from government officials, and it's not just government officials, it's the city's going through a renaissance, and everyone there is so accommodating to help one another. I'm not in the real estate business, for example. People come to me with real estate deals, and we pass them on to other folks who I think could do the deal. New York City, maybe in a certain way, I've been coming here for a long time. Sometimes the people won't necessarily pass those deals on because they want to sit on them, and it's kind of competitive and mature in a different way. And so there's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's really interesting at the moment.
Michael?
Sure. So I think you've seen Florida shift from a migration pattern, really, over the last decade to now we're seeing institutions be built in the market. You're seeing Wells Fargo move their whole wealth business, to your point, Joe, to Southeast Florida. And when you look at the Gold Coast, which is really Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach counties, you've got a $600 billion economy that's ready to scale with a huge financial services ecosystem, plenty of talent. We're bringing Vanderbilt to market and a ton of other assets that add value to people who are living and working there, and really building out the infrastructure that allows industries to scale on top of what Florida's already built over the last 15 years.
Let's talk about Citadel, the most bullish of the firms, building its pretty significant Miami office space. What are the various efforts that Ken Griffin has made to entice people to move to Miami?
I'll start with that.
Yeah.
I think what really is apparent with Ken and the video of the New York City mayor that recently went viral, you're really seeing a dichotomy of visions in this country, right? Especially in the political arena, where in the hubs that traditionally were the concentration of capital, that were the concentration of innovation, you're seeing this legislative and populist movement to penalize wealth, penalize success, penalize capital. In South Florida, in Miami in particular, we're not doing anything incredibly innovative, and we're not recreating the Black-Scholes model. It's just a common sense, pragmatic approach, right? You focus on residential quality of life. You focus on public safety, cleanliness, the basics of government. But then you also are very business friendly, right? You ask how I can help. You roll out the red carpet. And that's exactly what Ken's doing, right? He is a tremendous ambassador. Of course, he's going to advocate for the Citadel employees. However, what that brings is the ecosystem around something like Citadel. It's not just him and his employees. It's the Kirkland Ellis that has to be there to serve them. It's the wealth managers that essentially are going to then cater to this new wealth that move there. So it's not just Ken building his company there. It's the ecosystem that he also brings and develops it. And right now, at this time in our country, I'm not sure if we could ask for a better advocate for our region that is putting his money where his mouth is and actually leading by example.
In what ways does Ken advocate for his Citadel employees? What does it look like?
Yeah. Mike, you want to take that? Because I know you work closely with
Yeah, glad to talk about the work we're doing. So Ken Griffin and Steve Ross gave the council $10 million this year, and we're really correcting the perception gap that exists outside of market about what it's like to build and scale a business in Florida, particularly in Florida's Gold Coast and Southeast Florida. And I think when you have people of their success level and their ability to bring kind of exceptional execution to market, really doubling down on a single market in the United States with a similar message and expressing that Florida really is the best place in the country to build the next generation of American businesses, that's a signal, right, outside of the market when you see that. So we are investing aggressively in communications and marketing to explain outside of market here in New York and California and elsewhere what differentiates Florida and how the potential for growth exists there, which is unlike a lot of traditional legacy markets in the country.
Part of the transition that employees will make involves things like schools, thinking about traffic, thinking about homes, the real physicality of shifting your family and your business and your pod, if you're a multi-strat, to cities like Miami. So are there ways that Ken, Citadel, or other firms are helping employees with that part of it?
Yeah, so through the Council of 100, we have over 200 CEOs statewide who are focused both on the opportunity set in Florida and the challenges. So infrastructure, housing costs, water, quality and quantity over time are all critical issues for the state of Florida. You've got a deeply engaged, we just have CEOs as members of the council, and they're focusing their efforts on solving these problems now before they become problematic and greater friction points for people coming to market. So that engagement of a private sector in Florida, and to your point earlier, government as a partner as you develop these solutions, is really unique. After operating in a market like New York for 15 years, most of my career, it's really a position of partnership in Florida. Everybody wants to solve the solutions at speed and at scale. You've got an active private sector that's innovative and a government that's going to support that work over time. So I think right now what you're seeing in Florida, it paired with an economy that's going to cross $2 trillion in the next couple of years. I mean, the size and scale of our economy, the density of the industries that we've got there, from healthcare to aerospace to financial services to defense, is really unlike any other state in the country. And you've got a blank slate because we don't have institutional assets like subways that are 100 years old that you have to maintain. So we're able to innovate on movement of people, on development of attainable housing, and move a lot faster than markets like New York can to correct those problems.
Are there specific things you're doing to
So
help
the state led the
side?
country with one of the biggest affordable housing laws a couple of years ago in America, a $750 million initiative to really develop workforce housing across the state. Transportation and movement of people. We're looking at vertical transport of people, particularly in Southeast Florida, and innovating on that front. We've got best-in-class mass transit with the Brightline, moving you from Miami through Broward, from Palm Beach up to Orlando. So a lot of those things are in process right now, all being really led by private sector innovators and supported by government who wants to see the state scale.
Justus, maybe you can talk a bit about what it was like for you to move your business and your family to Florida, what worked really well, and what were some of the challenges that you had to face?
Sure, yeah. And again, like when we set up an office during COVID, the idea wasn't necessarily to live there. It was just, hey, you know what, we're down here, it's during COVID, let's set an office up here and let's just kind of see how it goes, you know, generally speaking. Sometimes in life you don't plan things, you just kind of do things and you look backwards and they really work out well. And I'm fortunate enough to say that's kind of how it ended up. But yeah, you know, I mean, look, you know, we realized we need to have a presence there. When we had a presence there, we realized, oh my God, there's so many great opportunities here. You know, we're in the aerospace and defense industry. We're on the Space Coast there. We're finding great investment opportunities. But for me, more so, it just because again, like I bounce around between a few different cities. It was just the renaissance and the energy. I'm an energy guy, and just the energy and the enthusiasm around the city, and just the willingness to kind of help. People that don't know each other are willing to help. And that's obviously an American thing, but just it was really accentuated there because I don't know the stat, Mike might have it, but half the people that are down there aren't from there. So just that real willingness to collaborate and really kind of help one another. So just having that Renaissance type of feel, I think was paramount in this kind of equation. And look, anybody who's ever moved, whether it was from Toronto to New York or wherever that might be, it's not easy to move, right? It's a real pain in the ass to move. You've got to start from scratch. You've got to find new schools. You've got to find a new daycare guy, dry cleaner. You've got to figure out the streets and restaurants and all that sort of stuff. So you've really got to be very keen to uproot your life and kind of start over. But what I will say is I think that's very American to do so. And if you go back from Plymouth Rock, right? So I mean, the history of this country is people are seeking opportunities. It's the country of opportunity. And people have always been doing hard things since day one, Plymouth Rock, or even since, let's say, the Tea Party, right? We thought that we were paying too much taxes, so we weren't interested in that, and we started a revolution, and the rest is history. And I think you're seeing an element of that currently. And what I would say is I think it's an element of also maybe the California gold rush of like 1849. San Francisco was a city, or it wasn't even a city. It was a town of less than 1,000 people in 1849. And it was only because of the opportunity of the gold rush did California and San Francisco become what it is. And so what I think is, if you look back at a long enough time, the transformational aspects of what's happening now in this moment for South Florida specifically, and Florida as a state, I think it's going to be unbelievable and unrecognizable over 10, 20, and 30 years.
Just to bolster that point, Florida's a young economy, right? So Florida's economy has evolved post-air conditioning and post-getting rid of mosquitoes in the state. It is not a 250-year-old economy like New York is. So we're on the front end of a growth curve on a base of $1.8 trillion with real depth and expertise in competitive global industries. So just to bolster that point, we're at the front end of a gold rush in Southeast Florida.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, one thing that I think is very unique, because I was in New York City for 15 years, is the tremendous collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. There is just this incredible sense of optimism in Miami and Miami Beach and South Florida in particular that really leads to this collaborative atmosphere. It almost feels like the new frontier people kind of get the sense that we're all building this together. So there is tremendous collaboration, and talking about some of the infrastructure challenges we have, it was actually at iConnections in March in Miami. Barry Sternlicht spoke and said, schools are our Achilles heel. And we heard from people that were moving here, and that was one of the bottlenecks of quality education. And I'm very proud to announce, this is the first time it's being announced publicly, Alpha Schools, the AI tech-driven school that is tremendously respected by the likes of Bill Ackman. Jack Lamont is the founder. He's spoken at iConnections. I've been working with them for months, and this is the first time being publicly announced. They'll be opening up a school location in Miami Beach.
When you think about other things that firms are implementing, if we look at, for example, a non-compete legislation that Ken Griffin had supported to that's now become law, it's a 4-year non-compete. How do you think about moves like that could be detrimental in dissuading talent from moving to Florida with the thought of a potentially 4-year non-compete, which even in our industry of hedge funds, 2 years can be onerous, 4 years definitely is. Could that serve as a deterrent?
You know, maybe that's one specific case, and while Ken Griffin was the main catalyst that our region will forever be grateful for, I think what is underappreciated is that ecosystem that is developed below the Citadel levels by my friend and business partner, Justus, things like that, where our office is in a former Burger King, right, on a street that used to be a nightclub district. And right now, we're paying office rents in there for a Class A+ office space that's the equivalent of Hudson Yards or one Vanderbilt. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Miami was make it or break it by Ken Griffin and what Citadel was doing. However, now, because of the example that he set, it's people like Justus, it's people that are bringing these opportunities that just did not exist in Miami and Miami Beach before. When I moved down there 12 years ago, my biggest concern was I was starting a family, and if something happened to that job, all options would have to be on the table, right? I couldn't just say, I'm at Morgan Stanley, if something happens, I'll walk across the street to Goldman Sachs. I said, I'm raising my daughter here. I could have to move back to New York City or move to North Carolina. There was not that plethora of jobs. That has really changed, right? We are developing an ecosystem. It's not on the level of New York, but it is night and day above where it was in Miami just 5 and certainly 10 years ago.
Can I ask you, Justice, about your thoughts on the 4-year non-compete law?
Sure. I mean, I don't, I can't speak specifically to it. I think, I don't think non-competes are unusual. I think they exist in every, industry and every city. I think in a certain way they are prohibitive. Yep. But at the same time, I mean, Ken and Citadel, they run such a great operation. It's kind of a badge of honor in a certain way. And, if folks have to stick around for a year or two longer, it might not be the worst thing in the world. And so I think they've got a good program there.
Joe, you mentioned the prices of real estate comparing to Hudson Yards. I'm curious, Mike, how you are thinking about affordability for broadly Florida and how you think about other communities being potentially priced out compared to the rising cost of living in hubs like Miami.
Yeah, so in Florida, you're seeing really innovative development around that challenge. Florida's a big economy with hubs from Tampa to Jacksonville to the Space Coast and all the way down to Southeast Florida with their own really resilient economies driving high-wage job growth. So you have optionality within the state. In addition to that, if you fly over Florida at night, I mean, the only thing that's lit up is the perimeter and the coast. 90% of Florida is undeveloped still. So you're going to see development move inward in the state, and you have tremendous opportunity for affordable housing that is accessible to every region of the Gold Coast. You can run to West Palm Beach from Indiantown. There's affordable housing being built there. It's really driven by opportunity the private sector is seeing, where you can get a $250,000 single-family house and be in West Palm Beach in your office in 20 or so minutes. That's a remarkable lifestyle change compared to being in a market like New York, where you've got an hour and a half commute on average, right, coming in at that wage rate. So we think we're building that in real time with the growth of the economy. Florida is positioned to respond to that growth and build in a way that's unlike any market I've ever worked in. Just the pace at which Florida is able to deploy solutions is really unbelievable when you're used to a market like New York. And the other thing you've got is certainty for capital to be deployed. So if you're going to make a $5 billion investment over the next decade in Florida, you have 100% certainty that that investment is going to go toward what you're hoping to invest in, which is much different than markets like New York, which in a lot of ways are going to change that position over time based on tax structure or talent moving or challenges that we don't even know about yet. So I think certainty in deploying capital adds to the private sector's desire to build housing alongside their developments. You're seeing it with the hospital system, building housing privately funded on site for nurses and first responders to live in. You're seeing it in the hospitality and tourism industry in Palm Beach, people building housing within 5 minutes of very expensive property because they choose to take care of their employees. So you don't have a defensive posture to employment from the leadership perspective in Florida like you often do in New York. And I think that breeds collaboration, honestly, and a great relationship between employers and employees that solve a lot of these cost problems over time.
Yeah, affordability, housing affordability is certainly one of our biggest challenges we face as a local government, probably more so in Miami Beach than just about anywhere else in Florida. However, the private sector really acts very quickly to that. And I think it actually touches on your point, Hema, about why a lot of funds, it's 50 people and under, right? Because of the increasing affordability challenges, it's great for the founders and the principals. However, we really have to develop that housing affordability for the associates and the VPs, people that are making $200,000, $250,000 per year. When I moved down to Miami 10 years ago, there was also one of the competitive advantages of Miami was affordability. That gap has since closed with New York City. However, we are being very proactive, in building housing, in taking on some of those challenges. And it's just another example of where the private sector and the public sector are really collaborating quite well.
Do you see a certain type of talent especially gravitating towards Miami, whether that be by demographic, age, type of role?
Well, I think we saw it originally in finance, right? And I'll never forget during COVID, I was on Brickell Avenue, and I saw a bunch of guys in the finance bro vests. I'm like, okay, this is very not Miami. And ever since then, it started accelerating, and finance got all of the attention. However, I talked about the dichotomy of visions we're seeing in the country, especially when it comes to taxation. In Florida right now, our governor just put on the ballot for November getting rid of property taxes for homesteaded residents, right? Think about that when we're seeing other cities and other countries, a lot of these hubs of capital that are thinking about how to tax capital gains and how to increase taxes. We're thinking about how to roll those back. And while the recent elections, I think we thought we were going to see an acceleration of finance talent from New York City, which we continue to see. What was unexpected is the amount of tech that has really gravitated towards Miami. You see it with some of the headline names like Alex Karp and Palantir, some of the Sequoia Capital guys, but it's also that kind of underlying system there. It's not just the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, but it's actually Sergey Brin. Not only did he move here, but he shows up at a hackathon in Miami. Those things would have been unfathomable just years ago. So it's not just the high-level people. We're seeing it in finance, but now we're also seeing it in technology as well.
How does the shift from California compare to New York?
I'll let Justus talk about that, given his background in the tech sector.
And I think we're at a unique point, or I guess a moment in time, in the sense that just philosophically, I think people are looking at things differently. And what I mean by that is that historically, I think generally speaking, people were, let's say, okay paying a reasonable or even a little bit more amount of tax, generally speaking. But what I can say, with my own eyes and conversations and just common sense is, I think at this moment in time, people aren't necessarily okay just paying more in tax. They're actually looking at how are you running the state? Are you allocating these funds appropriately? And so I think there is a bit of a difference between the state of New York, state of California, and Florida, where you look at the numbers and the budgets where I would say these California and New York are saying just pay more and it's going to be okay. Whereby the state of Florida is saying, no, like if we can save you money and you can have more money in your pockets and the government can be smaller, leaner, and we can still have terrific crime numbers and do all that sort of stuff, we would actually like a smaller government. And as a taxpayer and maybe a common sense person, you're like, wow, that actually makes sense. We shouldn't just keep paying more and more budgets and tax for the government. Maybe the government should do a better job of allocating their resources and people can save more of their money. And there's a stark contrast between New York State at the moment, California, and Florida. And I think the numbers kind of speak for themselves. And that's largely why there's been such a migration into that state.
Just to put a finer point on that, I mean, based on numbers, we've got 25 million people in Florida and a $115 billion state budget. New York's got 19 million and falling residents with a $269 billion budget that was passed a couple of weeks ago. It is 2x per person, per capita, to run the government in New York versus in Florida.
So it's twice as expensive.
Numbers, yes. It is an extraordinary gap, and we do not have more potholes in Florida than New York. You don't see that cost differential in your day-to-day life. In fact, it's the exact opposite.
I think as a government official, taxing somebody, taxing a constituent is amongst the most consequential decisions that we make. And I'm a private sector guy that happens to serve in public office. So for me to ask somebody for their tax dollars, I ask myself a philosophical question: how can government allocate their dollars better than they can, right? Why can I use this as a government official in a better, more efficient manner than that person could if they kept that dollar? And while I serve in government, I think the private sector can do a lot of things better than government. So that's why I always steer more towards, if there's solutions or even challenges that we can use from the private sector, let's keep our taxes low and have that collaborative effort, because taxing somebody is amongst the most consequential things that you can do. And people are starting to really make those decisions with their feet, as we see through those migration numbers in Florida.
Are there any specific, really creative collaborations you've seen between the private sector and government, or between any of these sort of big name industrial firms and what they are offering their employees, or working with the government, working with the city, to try to make it easier for their talent to move? Any creative ways
I
of
think
going about that?
affordable housing is a great example in Florida, where you've got the state basically saying you can have maximum density in your region if you build a certain amount of affordable housing in your development. And that was passed 3 years ago. You are seeing dozens. I mean, I'm sure you're seeing it in Southeast Florida. I'm seeing it all over the state of these dense, affordable developments coming online in real time that are directly supporting workforce housing needs across the state. And then that's paired with our economic development strategy, which is really going after high-wage, resilient jobs and bringing them to market so that people can afford to continue to live in Florida over time. I think a lot of people in New York underplay the density of our industries in Florida and the size and scope of them across the board. But we're offering really high-wage jobs with the #1 university system in the country for 10 years running, and a talent pipeline locally that's really well positioned to continue their lives in Florida and scale and support company growth as we grow the economy.
And the private sector built a high-speed rail from Miami to Tampa in 5 years, 4 years, right? And we look at what's happening in California, where they have a $50 billion train to nowhere. And we did that working with the private sector without taxpayer money, but getting those permits quicker, having a P3 collaboration that allowed them to be successful. We want government to facilitate success, not be a barrier to it.
Fast forward 5 years. What does Miami look like? Justus?
5 years. 5 years is a long time, but it's actually not that long in the grand scheme of things. So, I mean, I would say, if you're to look forward 10 years, because I mean, there is the element of just getting set up and I guess the velocity of capital and how long things take. But what I will say is I think the trajectory is fantastic for all the reasons that Joe and Mike can attest to. The trajectory is there, right? As long as the government and the folks at the top keep in that same narrative, the same direction, because that's always a little bit of the X factor, right? Does the folks that make the decisions, do they kind of pivot from there? But we know the favorite, who's going to be the new governor of Florida this year, Byron Donalds. He's polling at 90%. He's almost a lock. Pro-business guy. So I think from a state level, I think the next 4 years are going to be conducive to the last number of years with Ron DeSantis. So I think there's a lot of really good things that we're going to have momentum in the next 5 and 10 years. I think not everyone, but I think people will continue to flock to Florida. I think they'll set up there. I think the folks that are already there will continue to contribute to the economy. And I think there's a little X factor of the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezoses, all these folks who've just showed up there recently. Sergey Brin, Larry Page, all these different folks, how much are they going to contribute to their economy? How many folks are they going to move, right? And so even if they don't go all in, and if they wade into that equation, you've got so many tailwinds for that region, and I'm extremely bullish and excited for the next 5, 10 years.
I'll sum it up just saying optimism, opportunity, personal freedom.
It's going to be the place where the next generation of American exceptionalism is really built. We're building a builder economy. We want to build companies in Florida moving forward, not just migrate people there. You're seeing that transition in real time right now, and I think 5 or 10 years, you're actually going to see it on the ground.
Excellent. Well, lots to watch for, lots to be excited about, and we'll circle back in 5 to 10 years. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Joseph,